Hello, this is Paul and this is Reloader123. In today's segment we are talking about primarily the tools that you're going to be using for reloading, and where better place to start than the heart of your reloading setup, and that is the press. So there's several different manufacturers of reloading presses. In this kind of entry-level type press, most of them make a very nice press. This happens to be an RCBS press. I actually have two other RCBS presses that are a little more dated. This one happens to probably be 20 or so years old, as the other ones are even a little bit older than that. So this has lasted me that long. So your investment, whether the RCBS, Hornady, Lyman, Lee, the presses are going to last you a good long time. I want to talk to you a little bit about setting up your press, talk to you a little bit about the workbench. So you really want to have your press set up on a bench that gives you a little bit of area to work around, that is actually firmly screwed to the worktop. This is a very heavy duty bench. It's really made of several dozen 2x6s. This thing is as stout as it comes. You couldn't move it if you wanted to. So when we're reloading something like 44 Magnum, this press is not going to tweak the top board when you're trying to resize, and nor is it going to flex and make a mess of powder or anything anywhere else on your bench. So mount it securely. Each one of these presses is going to have some sort of arm, like you see in my hand right now, that raises this ram. This ram then pushes the shell up into the die. We'll show you a little bit about how that process looks. Each one of these presses has some sort of priming component. Primers fit in this tube, or they slide down this tube, and then they end up in this priming assembly, which once you resize and raise this ram, lowering the arm, you put the priming assembly in here, and then you can see it kind of pop out the top, and that's basically it pushing that primer up in. So there's a process of raising the ram, and another step of what happens when you lower the ram. So that's the priming assembly, and that's kind of generally how it works. You know, and the die is going to screw right here into the top. Let me just kind of show you what that looks like. Very simple. The vast majority of these, anything in the last 20 years, is using a die that screws into the top of the press. The ram is raised and it pushes the case up into performing your various steps. The shells are held in place by what's called a shell holder. Go figure. This is actually clips into the place in the top of the ram. And then you put your piece of brass in there and you'll raise it to do your function. So that's one of the tools for the job. Of course, you have to purchase, that makes a little bit of noise, apologize, but anyway, you've got your die, your shell tool, and your press. We're going to take a look at the die separately. We're going to take them apart. As you can see, there's a few pieces here. Maybe you can barely see it, but there's a few pieces here, but I can assure you there's something to be seen there. The press needs very little maintenance. This press is aged, and RCBS was, I mean, even after 20 years, I told them that I was getting a little play in the ram here. They sent me a brand new ram for nothing. I keep a little bit of grease on here, and all the pivot points, as you can see here, and there's some down below the camera angle here. But essentially, you're going to do very little lubrication. It's going to last you a long time. One last piece that I want to show you is that it takes very little tools to set up your press. Essentially, you saw that shell holder just slides in here. The die itself just screws into the top. There's actually some adjustment here to the priming setup. It takes just a simple Allen wrench to do that setup. And depending on there's no sense in really going into the specifics on this press, because your press could be very different. But in just real general terms, it really doesn't take much. The press is, even though it's the heart of the system, there's not a whole lot of adjustment that happens here. Once your priming assembly is set up, it tends to work, and then you have to, for whatever primer you're using, say a large pistol Magnum, when you switch it to a small pistol primer, you're going to have some adjustment to make, but that's actually fairly simple, and I think fairly well outlined. If you have questions, you can send me a note. Once the primers have popped out on this particular design, this press has a small tray that once the primer pops out, they basically just start collecting in this little tray that's held together with this tiny little plastic. Interestingly enough, this tray is as simple as a design as it is. It works great. Sometimes primers end up on the floor, but for the most part, they end up right in this tray, and then you can dispose of them in the garbage. Since these are going to be spent primers, there's no problem putting them in the garbage. But really, that is the press in its entirety. I think this particular press came with both setups for small pistol, large pistol, and a couple of these different tubes, which you saw before. And they come with in different diameters for both small and large pistol. Simple as that. Okay, let's move on to the die.